Tonight I let Rafe's hands wander. I convinced myself no one would ever know. But secrets always find a way out, especially in a town like ours. Now I'm the punchline of every joke at the school gate, and everyone agrees I deserve it. My name is Isolde Penrose, and I'm 34 years old. I work as an admin at Whitmore Dental. I have a daughter named Mira, who's 8, and until 6 months ago, I was married to Mark Penrose, high school history teacher and certified nice guy. I lived the kind of ordinary suburban life that looks perfect in Christmas card photos but feels like slow suffocation when you're living it day after day. I should probably tell you up front that I'm not looking for sympathy. I know what I did, and I know what it cost me. But if you're expecting some tearful confession where I beg for forgiveness and promise to be better, you're reading the wrong story. The truth is messier than that. The truth is that even now, sitting alone in my studio apartment with the thin walls and the broken air conditioner, I still think I deserved something more than what I had. Mark and I met in college, got married at 26, bought our little house on Maple Street when Mira was 2. For years, we played our parts perfectly. He coached Little League on weekends, I organized bake sales for the PTA. We had date nights at the Olive Garden and took family vacations to the same lake house every summer. From the outside, we looked like we had it all figured out, but inside our house, we were strangers sharing the same mortgage. Mark would come home from school, dump his papers on the kitchen table, and grade until bedtime. He wore these hideous brown slippers that made shuffling sounds on the hardwood. And he never once noticed when I bought new dresses or changed my hair. Our conversations revolved around Mira's schedule, grocery lists, and which bills were due. When was the last time he'd asked about my day at the clinic? When was the last time he'd looked at me, really looked, like I was a woman instead of just the person who did his laundry? His mother Lorraine called every Sunday at exactly 2 o'clock to deliver her weekly dose of passive-aggressive commentary. "How's dear Isolde managing the house? I hope she's not working too many hours at that little job of hers." That little job paid for half our bills, but Lorraine had never worked a day in her life, so what would she know? Mark would just nod along, never defending me, never telling his mother to back off. The worst part wasn't the boredom or the loneliness. It was the way I'd started to disappear, even to myself. At 34, I felt like I was already dead, just going through the motions until it was time to actually be buried. When I looked in the mirror, all I saw was someone's wife, someone's mother, someone's employee. Where was Isolde? What had happened to the woman who used to stay up all night reading poetry, who wore red lipstick to the grocery store just because she felt like it? That's when Rafe Langley started delivering supplies to our clinic. He was 31, with dark hair that was always a little messy, and this way of looking at you, like he was seeing something interesting. Not handsome in the traditional sense, but magnetic, confident. He'd joke with Brenda at the front desk, compliment Lana's new earrings, and when he got to my office, he'd lean against the doorframe and ask how my day was going. And here's the thing, he actually waited for the answer. The first time he asked me out for coffee, I laughed and told him I was married. He shrugged and said, "So, it's just coffee." The second time, I said I was too busy. The third time, I found myself saying yes. We met at a little place downtown, nowhere anyone I knew would see us. I told Mark I was having drinks with my friend Evelyn after work. Rafe ordered a beer, I had wine, and for 2 hours I remembered what it felt like to be interesting to someone. He asked about my favorite books, my college major, whether I'd ever wanted to travel. When I mentioned I'd always wanted to see Paris, he didn't change the subject or start talking about mortgage payments. He said, "What's stopping you?" Nobody had asked me that question in years. I went home that night, and Mark was already asleep, snoring softly with his back to me. I lay there staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of my conversation with Rafe. The way he'd laughed at my jokes. The way he'd leaned forward when I talked, like what I was saying actually mattered. For the first time in months, I felt alive. The coffee dates became a regular thing. Every other week, sometimes more. I'd tell Mark I was shopping, or meeting Evelyn, or staying late at work. He never questioned it, never seemed to notice the extra effort I put into my appearance on those days. I started wearing perfume again, bought new underwear, spent actual money on a good haircut. If my own husband wasn't going to appreciate these things, at least someone would. Rafe lived in a small apartment across town, the kind of place a bachelor keeps when he's not trying to impress anyone. Mismatched furniture, empty pizza boxes, a bathroom that could use a good scrubbing. But when he kissed me for the first time, pressed against his kitchen counter with the afternoon sun streaming through dirty windows. It felt like the most beautiful place in the world. I told myself it was just kissing. Just harmless flirtation with someone who made me feel human again. But boundaries have a way of shifting when you're not paying attention. One afternoon became two, then three. Coffee dates became long lunches. Kissing became more. The first time I slept with Rafe, I cried afterward. Not from guilt, from relief. I'd forgotten what it felt like to be wanted, to have someone's complete attention, to feel desirable instead of just useful. He traced patterns on my bare shoulder and told me I was beautiful, and I believed him because I needed to believe him. Covering my tracks became an art form. I deleted text messages as soon as I read them, paid for everything in cash, kept spare clothes in my car in case I smelled like his cologne. I became an expert at manufacturing alibis. Girls' night with Evelyn, late inventory at the clinic, grocery shopping that somehow took 3 hours. Mark never questioned any of it. Why would he? I'd been reliable for 8 years. Predictable. Boring. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was having the most exciting affair of my life with a man my husband would never suspect existed. Mark lived in his world of lesson plans and faculty meetings, completely oblivious to the fact that his wife was discovering what passion felt like for the first time since college. At the clinic, Brenda started making jokes about how happy I looked lately. "Someone's been getting her beauty sleep," she'd say with a wink. If only she knew how little sleep I was actually getting. Lana mentioned that I seemed different, more confident. Even Dr. Whitmore commented that I'd been more efficient lately, more energetic. They were right. For the first time in years, I had something to look forward to. The dangerous part was how easy it became, how natural it felt to live two completely different lives. At home, I was Isolde the wife, packing lunches and helping with homework and pretending to care about Mark's stories from school. But 3 afternoons a week, I was Isolde the woman, the one who existed for herself instead of everyone else. Rafe never pushed for more than I was willing to give. He never asked me to leave Mark or made promises about our future. We both understood what this was, an escape, a reminder that we were more than our daily responsibilities. It was perfect because it was temporary, contained, separate from my real life. Except secrets have a way of growing beyond the spaces you create for them. The first crack appeared on a Sunday evening. Mark's mother had posted a family photo from dinner at her house, one of those staged shots she loved putting on Facebook to show everyone what a perfect family they were. Except I wasn't in it. I'd been with Rafe that afternoon and missed dinner entirely, claiming a migraine when Mark called. The comments started immediately. "Where's Isolde? Hope she's feeling better soon. The family looks wonderful, missing one though." Lorraine's response was pure poison wrapped in concern. "Poor dear has been so tired lately. We're praying for her health." I stared at that photo for an hour, reading every comment, watching the likes accumulate. For the first time, I realized that my absence was being noticed, documented, discussed. But instead of fear, I felt something closer to satisfaction. Let them wonder. Let them gossip. At least they were finally paying attention to me. Mark started asking more questions after that. Where had I been when he called? Why was my phone going straight to voicemail? Had I really been at the clinic until 8 o'clock? His tone was casual, but there was something new in his eyes when he looked at me. Something watchful. I should have been more careful, should have pulled back, ended things with Rafe before the walls started closing in. But I was addicted to feeling alive, to being seen and wanted and appreciated. After years of being invisible in my own marriage, the attention was like oxygen to someone who'd been drowning. The second crack came from an unexpected source, Mira. I was in the kitchen making her lunch when my phone buzzed with a text from Rafe, something sweet and flirty about how he couldn't wait to see me later. Mira was sitting at the counter eating cereal, and she glanced over when the notification lit up my screen. "Who's Rafe?" she asked, innocent and curious. My heart stopped. "Wrong number, baby. Someone texting the wrong person." She nodded and went back to her cereal. But I saw the way her eyes lingered on my phone. 8 years old, but already smart enough to notice inconsistencies. Already old enough to sense when something didn't add up. That night, I deleted Rafe's contact from my phone and made him promise to only text me during work hours. But the damage was done. The perfect compartmentalization I'd worked so hard to maintain was starting to break down. My two worlds were bleeding into each other, and I wasn't sure I could keep them separate much longer. The third crack was the biggest one yet. We were at Mira's school for the fall festival. One of those mandatory family events where parents pretend to enjoy carnival games and overpriced hot dogs. Mark was working the ring toss booth. I was helping with face painting, and everything seemed normal, perfectly, boringly normal. That's when Simon Walsh, Mark's friend from the faculty, pulled me aside. Hey, Isolde, can I talk to you for a minute? We walked away from the crowds, toward the empty playground. Simon looked uncomfortable, like he was about to say something he'd been rehearsing. I'm worried about Mark, he said finally. He seems different lately, distracted, quiet, even more than usual. Is everything okay at home? I gave him my best concerned wife performance. He's been working too hard, grading those AP papers. You know how he gets when he's stressed. Simon nodded, but he didn't look convinced. If you guys ever need anything, you know Sarah and I are here for you, right? Whatever's going on. Whatever's going on. The words echoed in my head as I walked back toward the festival. What exactly did Simon think was going on? How much did he know? How much did any of them know? I found Mark at his booth, helping a little boy aim at the milk bottles. He looked up when I approached, and for just a moment, I saw something in his expression that made my blood run cold. It wasn't suspicion or anger or hurt. It was calculation, like he was working out a problem, weighing variables, planning his next move. Everything okay? He asked, his voice perfectly normal. You look pale. Just tired, I said. Long day. He smiled and nodded, then turned back to the game. But I caught him watching me in his peripheral vision, and I realized with a sick certainty that my husband, quiet, predictable, boring Mark, knew exactly what I'd been doing. The question wasn't whether he'd figured it out. The question was what he planned to do about it. That night, I lay awake listening to him breathe, wondering how long he'd known and what evidence he might have gathered. Mark was methodical about everything. His lesson plans, his grading system, the way he organized his closet. If he suspected his wife was having an affair, he wouldn't confront her until he had all the facts lined up in neat, irrefutable rows. I thought about ending things with Rafe, coming clean, begging for forgiveness. But the truth was, I wasn't sorry. Not really. For 6 months, I'd felt like myself again. I'd remembered what it was like to be desired, to be interesting, to matter to someone. Was I supposed to apologize for that? Was I supposed to go back to being invisible just to keep the peace? Maybe I should have been scared. Maybe I should have been planning damage control or thinking about how to save my marriage. But lying there in the dark, listening to my husband's steady breathing, all I could think was, let him know. Let him finally pay attention to me, even if it was too late. At least then I'd know I still existed. The confrontation I was expecting never came. Instead, Mark did something much worse. He started being strategic. It began with small things. He changed the password on our laptop without telling me. He started taking his phone with him everywhere, even to the bathroom. He began asking Mira detailed questions about my schedule, disguised as casual conversation. Did Mommy say when she'd be home from work today? Did she mention stopping anywhere? At the clinic, the gossip mill was churning. Brenda had apparently started a rumor about my mysterious afternoon appointments, and even though she didn't know the truth, she was getting uncomfortably close. Our Isolde's been very busy lately, she'd say with a knowing smirk. All those errands she's been running. Lana tried to warn me. Brenda's been asking questions about your schedule. I'd be careful if I were you, but I was past the point of being careful. I was in too deep, too committed to this double life I'd created. Rafe had become more than just an escape. He was proof that I was still a woman worth wanting. Giving that up felt like giving up the only part of myself that mattered. The affair intensified. We started meeting more often, taking bigger risks. He wanted me to spend entire evenings with him, to stay overnight. The requests felt less like invitations and more like demands, and I started to see a side of Rafe that wasn't as charming as I'd thought. He was possessive, jealous of the time I spent at home. He started asking when I was going to leave Mark, as if that had always been the plan. You're not happy with him, he'd say after we'd been together. Why are you staying? Because leaving would mean admitting that I'd blown up my entire life for a man who delivered dental supplies and lived in a studio apartment with dirty dishes in the sink. Because as much as I resented Mark, I wasn't ready to give up the security of our life together. Because Mira deserved better than having her family destroyed for her mother's midlife crisis. But I didn't say any of that. Instead, I'd kiss him and change the subject, and pretend we weren't both starting to want different things from this arrangement. My friendship with Evelyn began to strain under the weight of all my lies. She'd been my closest friend for 5 years, the person I called when I needed to complain about Mark or laugh about clinic drama. But now every conversation felt like a performance. She'd ask about my marriage, and I'd have to manufacture problems that weren't the real problems. She'd suggest girls' nights that I'd have to decline because I was seeing Rafe. She started looking at me differently, like she was trying to solve a puzzle. "You've been different lately," she said one afternoon when we met for lunch. "Secretive. Is everything okay?" "Just busy with work and Mira," I lied. "You know how it is." But Evelyn had known me too long to buy that explanation. "Isolde, if something was wrong, you'd tell me, right? If you needed help with something?" The concern in her voice almost broke me. For a moment, I wanted to tell her everything. About Rafe, about Mark's suspicions, about how trapped I felt between the life I had and the life I wanted. But admitting the truth would mean facing it myself, and I wasn't ready for that yet. "Everything's fine," I said. "I promise." It was the last promise I'd make to her that I actually intended to keep. Church became a minefield. Lorraine had always used Sunday service as an opportunity to perform her role as the perfect Christian mother-in-law. But now her comments had a sharper edge. She'd pray loudly for families struggling with trust and communication, her eyes finding mine across the sanctuary. She'd make pointed remarks about the importance of commitment and faithfulness, always with that sweet smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Marriage is such hard work," she'd say to the other wives after service, her voice carrying just far enough for me to hear. "Some people just don't have the strength for it." Mark never defended me during these performances. He'd stand there with his hands in his pockets, nodding along like he agreed with every word. Whether he was protecting his relationship with his mother or building a case against me, I couldn't tell. Maybe both. The breaking point came on a Tuesday in November. I came home from an afternoon with Rafe to find Mark sitting at the kitchen table with a manila folder in front of him. No laptop, no papers to grade, just that folder and an expression I'd never seen before. "We need to talk," he said. My heart hammered against my ribs, but I kept my voice steady. "About what?" He opened the folder and spread its contents across the table like he was laying out evidence in a courtroom. Photos of me and Rafe at the coffee shop. Printouts of text messages I thought I'd deleted. Credit card statements highlighting purchases I couldn't explain. A timeline of my lies, cross-referenced with my real whereabouts. "About Rafe Langley," Mark said quietly. "About where you've really been spending your afternoons. About what you think happens next." "I never." I stared at the evidence of my affair laid out in neat, chronological order. Mark had been building this case for months, documenting every lie, every inconsistency, every moment I thought I was being clever. He'd been 3 steps ahead of me the entire time. "Mark, I can explain." "No," he said, his voice still calm, still controlled. "You can't, and I don't want you to try." He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at our backyard where Mira's swing set sat empty in the fading light. "I've already talked to a lawyer," he said without turning around. "I've opened my own bank account. I've spoken to Mira's principal about keeping her schedule consistent during the transition." Transition, like our marriage was a business being dissolved, all assets and liabilities accounted for. "You can't just," I started, but he cut me off. "I can, and I am. You made your choice, Isolde. Now I'm making mine." He turned back to face me, and I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Not anger, not hurt, but something colder, something final. "I'm taking Mira to my mother's for the weekend. When we get back, I want you gone." The words hit me like a physical blow. "Gone? Mark, this is my house too. You can't just kick me out." "Actually, I can. Check the deed. The house is in my name because your credit wasn't good enough when we bought it, remember? You can stay in a hotel until you find an apartment. I'll give you a month to get settled before we start the formal separation process." I felt the ground shifting beneath my feet. Everything I'd taken for granted suddenly uncertain. "What about Mira? What about her? She'll live with me. Visit you on weekends, assuming you can provide a stable environment." The clinical way he discussed our daughter's future, like she was another asset to be divided, made me sick. But underneath my shock, I felt something else rising. Rage. "You self-righteous bastard," I said. "You think you're so perfect, but you've been just as dishonest as I have. All this sneaking around, gathering evidence, planning behind my back. At least I was honest about what I wanted." Mark laughed, a sound I'd never heard from him before, cold and bitter. "Honest? You've been lying to me for months, to our daughter, to your friends. You've been living a completely fabricated life, and you want to talk to me about honesty? I lied because you stopped seeing me. The words came out louder than I'd intended. 8 years of resentment finally breaking free. When was the last time you touched me? When was the last time you asked about my dreams, or my fears, or anything that mattered to me? I became invisible in my own marriage, Mark. At least Rafe made me feel alive. So this is my fault? His voice was still quiet, but there was steel underneath it now. I'm responsible for your affair because I didn't pay enough attention to you. You're responsible for letting our marriage die long before I ever met Rafe. We stared at each other across the kitchen. 8 years of polite pretense finally stripped away. This was the most honest conversation we'd had in years, and it was happening far too late to save anything. Maybe you're right, Mark said finally. Maybe I did stop seeing you. But you know what, Isolde? I'm seeing you now, and I don't like what I'm looking at. He gathered up the papers from the table and slid them back into the folder. Mira and I are leaving in an hour. I suggest you use the time to pack whatever you need for the next few days. Mark, wait. But he was already walking away, already done with me. I heard him climbing the stairs to Mira's room, heard their muffled conversation through the ceiling. 20 minutes later, they were gone, leaving me alone in the house that was no longer mine. I called Rafe, but his phone went straight to voicemail. I tried Evelyn, but she didn't pick up. I sat in my empty kitchen, surrounded by the evidence of my deception, and realized that I had burned every bridge I'd ever built. For 6 months, I'd thought I was getting away with the perfect crime. But Mark had been watching, documenting, planning. While I was playing at being a femme fatale, he was quietly building the case that would destroy me. The worst part was that he was right. I had made my choice, and now I had to live with the consequences. But as I packed my suitcase and prepared to leave the only home I'd known for 8 years, I couldn't bring myself to regret what I'd done. At least I'd felt something. At least I'd been alive. Even if it had cost me everything. The hotel room was a special kind of purgatory. Beige walls, scratchy sheets, and the constant hum of the ice machine down the hall. I'd been there for 3 days when Evelyn finally returned my calls. I heard about you and Mark, she said without preamble. Brenda told everyone at book club. Of course she had. Brenda lived for other people's drama, and my affair was the juiciest gossip our little town had seen in years. So you know, I said. I know you've been lying to me for months. I know you used me as an alibi for your affair. I know you made me complicit in destroying your marriage without even telling me. Her voice was cold in a way I'd never heard before. Evelyn, who'd been my closest friend, who'd listened to me complain about Mark's boring habits and Lorraine's passive-aggressive comments, sounded like she was talking to a stranger. Evie, I'm sorry. I wanted to tell you, but what? You thought I'd approve? You thought I'd help you sneak around behind your husband's back? I thought you'd understand. You know how unhappy I was. Being unhappy doesn't give you the right to blow up your family. It doesn't give you the right to use your friends as cover for an affair. I could hear the disappointment in her voice, and it cut deeper than Mark's anger had. Mark's reaction I'd expected, even prepared for. But losing Evelyn felt like losing the last person who'd cared about me for myself. I never meant for it to go this far, I said. Then you should have stopped before it did. The line went quiet for a long moment. Evie, I can't do this, Isolde. I can't be your friend right now. Maybe someday, but not now. Not while you're still making excuses for what you did. She hung up before I could respond. I tried calling Rafe again, but he was still dodging my calls. When I drove by his apartment, his car wasn't there. When I stopped by the clinic on Friday to pick up my paycheck, Lana told me he'd requested a different route. He didn't want to deliver to our office anymore. The man I'd risked everything for had disappeared the moment things got complicated. By Monday, the whole town knew. I could see it in the way people looked at me when I went to the grocery store, in the way conversations stopped when I walked into a room. Brenda had done her work well. I wasn't just the woman who'd had an affair. I was the cautionary tale, the example of what happened when wives got too big for their britches. At the clinic, Dr. Whitmore called me into his office. I think we need to discuss your position here. I knew what was coming. Because of the gossip? Because your personal life has become a distraction in the workplace. Patients are asking questions. Staff members are uncomfortable. I think it might be best for everyone if you took some time off. Unpaid leave, until things settle down. You're firing me because I had an affair? I'm suggesting a temporary separation that might benefit all parties involved. More corporate speak, more euphemisms for the fact that I'd become a liability. First my marriage, then my friendships, now my job. The affair that was supposed to make me feel alive was systematically destroying every aspect of my life. I cleaned out my desk while Brenda watched with barely concealed satisfaction. 8 years of work, of building relationships with patients and colleagues, reduced to a cardboard box of personal items and a final paycheck. "I'm sorry it came to this," Lana said as I headed for the door. She was the only one who seemed genuinely sad to see me go. "No, you're not," I said. "But thanks for pretending." The apartment I found was a studio in the worst part of town, the kind of place you rent when you're desperate and your credit is shot. One room, a kitchenette, a bathroom with a shower that barely worked. It was all I could afford on unemployment, and even that wouldn't last long. Mark let me see Mira on Saturday afternoons, supervised visits at his mother's house. Lorraine would hover in the background, making sure I didn't corrupt her granddaughter with my mere presence. Mira was polite but distant, like she was talking to an acquaintance instead of her mother. "Are you coming home soon?" she asked during our second visit. "I don't think so, baby. Mommy and Daddy are going to live in different places for a while." "Because you were seeing that man?" My heart stopped. "What do you know about that?" "I heard Grandma Lorraine talking to Daddy. She said you were with another man instead of taking care of us. 8 years old, and already learning to judge me through other people's eyes. Already being taught that I was the villain in this story." "Sometimes adults make mistakes," I said carefully. "That doesn't mean I don't love you." "But you love him more?" How do you explain to a child that love and want are different things? That sometimes you can love your family and still feel like you're suffocating? That sometimes you make choices that hurt the people you care about because you're drowning and you'll grab onto anything that feels like air? "No, sweetheart, I don't love him more. I love you most of all." It was true, but it was also incomplete. I did love Mira more than anyone, but I'd still chosen my affair over her stability. I'd still prioritized my own needs over hers. Love wasn't always enough to make you a good person. The custody hearing was scheduled for December. Mark's lawyer had built an airtight case: the affair, my job loss, my unstable living situation, character witnesses who'd testify to my selfishness and deception. My lawyer, a public defender who looked like she was fresh out of law school, told me to prepare for limited visitation. "Your best bet is to show remorse," she said. "Take responsibility. Demonstrate that you're getting your life together. Prove that you can provide a stable environment for your daughter." But I wasn't sorry. Not really. I was sorry about the consequences. Sorry about hurting Mira. Sorry about losing my job and my friends. But I wasn't sorry about feeling alive for 6 months. I wasn't sorry about remembering what it felt like to be desired. And apparently, that showed. The hearing was a public humiliation. Mark's lawyer presented evidence of my affair, like a prosecutor making a case for murder. Photos, text messages, testimony from Brenda about my lies and deception. Evelyn took the stand and talked about how I'd used her as an alibi, how I'd made her unknowingly complicit in my betrayal. "She wasn't the person I thought I knew," Evelyn said, not meeting my eyes. The lying, the manipulation. It was like she'd become someone else entirely. Even Mira's teacher testified, talking about how distracted and upset Mira had been since the separation, how her grades had suffered, how she'd started acting out in class. When it was my turn to speak, I tried to explain, tried to make them understand that I'd been suffocating in my marriage, that I'd felt invisible and unappreciated, that the affair had been a desperate attempt to feel human again. But the words came out wrong, sounding like excuses instead of explanations. The judge looked at me like I was something distasteful she'd found on her shoe. "Mrs. Penrose, while I understand that marriage can be difficult, infidelity is never an appropriate solution to marital problems. Your actions have demonstrated a pattern of deception and selfishness that raises serious questions about your fitness as a parent." Mark was awarded full custody. I got supervised visitation every other weekend, contingent on maintaining stable employment and housing. The judge recommended counseling to address my underlying issues with commitment and honesty. I sat in my lawyer's car afterward, watching Mark leave the courthouse with Mira's hand in his. He looked relieved, vindicated, like justice had finally been served. Maybe it had. The final blow came 3 weeks later. I was scrolling through Facebook, torturing myself by looking at photos of the life I'd lost, when I saw Mark's post. It was a long, carefully crafted statement about forgiveness and moving forward, about the importance of community support during difficult times. "I want to thank everyone who has stood by Mira and me during this challenging period," he wrote. "Your kindness and support have meant the world to us. While I don't wish to dwell on the past, I want you all to know that we're doing well and looking forward to the future. Mira is resilient and strong, and with the love of our extended family and friends, I know she'll continue to thrive. The post had hundreds of likes and comments. People praising Mark for his strength and dignity. People offering continued support. People expressing sympathy for what he'd endured. My name wasn't mentioned once, but everyone knew what the post was really about. It was Mark's final move, his public statement that he'd emerged from our marriage as the victim, the good guy, the devoted father who'd been wronged by his selfish wife. And the worst part was, he was right. I had been selfish. I had prioritized my own needs over my family's well-being. I had lied and manipulated and justified my way into destroying the most important relationships in my life. But sitting alone in my studio apartment, reading the outpouring of support for my ex-husband while I remained the town pariah, I still couldn't bring myself to regret those 6 months with Rafe. They'd been the only time in years I'd felt like myself. Maybe that made me a terrible person. Maybe I deserved everything that had happened to me. But at least I'd been alive. The comments on Mark's post kept coming for days. Neighbors, colleagues, parents from Mira's school, all expressing their support and admiration for how he'd handled the situation. Several people mentioned what a strong father he was, how lucky Mira was to have him. Nobody mentioned me at all. I'd been erased from the narrative of my own family, reduced to an unnamed antagonist in Mark's story of survival and redemption, and maybe that was exactly what I deserved. Nulingu. Literation. 202, 509, 13, 13, 06.